So the question for today is, will you make more money renting your house furnished or unfurnished? So in this video, we'll take a look at the different categories of furnished rentals and which one, if any, might be the best choice for you financially. Hi, Steve Schultz here with Blue Flash Properties in Tucson, Arizona. Let's get right to it. So in order to answer the question, you need to first understand a few things so you can make a good decision. So let's begin by defining the difference between unfurnished and furnished rentals. So for starters, let's talk about unfurnished rentals, which I like to call unfurnished long-term rentals. So in this scenario, the property is rented without furnishings, and it's rented on a lease for 12 months or longer. When most people talk about a rental house, this is typically what they're talking about. And you can do these with almost any house, anywhere. Next is furnished rentals. So I like to think about furnished rentals in three different categories: short-term, mid-term, and long-term. So let's first talk about short-term. So short-term, when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about 3 to 7 day stays. Usually it's people on vacation or in town briefly, maybe for a wedding or graduation. And the goal here is to rent the property every single day of the year if possible. So think of the Airbnb business model for short-term rentals. Next is what I like to call midterm. And in the midterm furnished rental scenario, we're talking about 1 week to 3 month stays for a total of about 3 months per year. So it may be a combination. Maybe some people will be there for a week, another person for 3 weeks, one person for a month, another for 2, etc. So that total time rented is that 3 month period is what you're shooting for. Here in Tucson, this is designed primarily for snowbirds, with the peak season being January through March. So in this business model, a house is typically vacant for the other 9 months out of the year, and this is actually a very common approach here in Tucson for furnished rentals. The last category is what I call long-term. And so in a long-term scenario, there are 3 to 12 month stays. And again, any combination there in between. So one person or one family might be in the house for 3 months, another one for 4 months, another one for 7 months, whatever the case may be, right? Mixing and matching that to keep the property occupied for that period of time. But again, with those longer stays. So some examples, I guess, that would rent for longer periods might be insurance company clients who are placing homeowners. Maybe something happened at their property, maybe a fire, a flood, maybe mold remediation. So they're just getting into this furnished rental for a short period of time until their own property is ready to go again so they can move back into their home. Another example might be a traveling nurse, or another example that's very common here in Tucson as well is a foreign national pilot in town for military flight training. So those are some different examples for long term. So before we get into whether or not you should do furnished or not, the first thing we got to talk about is, could the house even be a good furnished rental? So first thing is the house in a homeowners association or HOA? Here in Tucson, most HOAs do not allow renting a property for less than 30 days. So if your house is in an HOA, right off the bat, you eliminate the possibility of it being a short-term rental. So be sure to check out, one, is it in an HOA, and what are the requirements or restrictions of that HOA? For short-term rentals, the house must also have access to all the amenities because the guests are looking for a vacation experience. So again, whether they're here for a wedding or graduation or just here for a weekend to enjoy the weather at different times of the year here in Tucson, that's what they're looking for, is the amenities. So they want to have access to the private or community pool, the golf course, the gym, the pickleball courts, tennis courts, all that type of stuff. So that's really important, again, especially for short-term rentals. In all furnished rentals, be it short-term, mid-term, or long-term, the house must have new furniture, artwork, beds, TVs, kitchenware, all that kind of stuff that needs to be new. And so it can't be old and dilapidated stuff or stuff that you picked up from a secondhand store just to fill the house. It's got to be new because that's what people are expecting. And the house must be located near what is important to that target market. So if it's schools for the family that's being relocated, if it's the hospital because of that traveling nurse, or the Air Force Base because of that training pilot, the location can be very important for them too, or at least good access to that location. So next common question is, how much gross annual income should you expect for your furnished rental? So as a general rule of thumb, we find that usually about 2 to 3 times the monthly rental rate of an unfurnished property is what you could expect for a furnished property. So for example, let's say if the property would rent for $2,000 per month as an unfurnished rental, you may be able to generate $4,000 to $6,000 as a furnished rental. The thing you got to remember is although that increase in income may sound great on the surface, you'll also have much higher costs. So let's take a look at those costs. So some of the costs to expect for furnished rentals, first of all, we were just talking about that new furniture, artwork beds, all that kind of stuff. Significant amount of money needs to be spent to furnish the property. So based on people that I know across the country that have been doing this for a long time, they estimated that it costs about $25,000 to $30,000 to furnish a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house. So here again, if you have that money to spend, great. If you don't, that could be a barrier for doing a furnished rental. Next, all the utilities, that's also going to be a cost. So Wi-Fi, cable, electric, water, gas, all those types of things are going to have to be on the entire year. You're going to have to be willing to cover that. The next one is maintenance, and you might be thinking, well, maintenance, you're going to have that for furnished or unfurnished. But the difference is for furnished rentals, it's typically going to be more frequent, and it's also oftentimes going to be more expensive due to the responsiveness required. So again, using short-term rentals as an example, people are only going to be there for a few days, so you can't say, hey, I'm going to be out there in a week to fix that thing. They're expecting that to be fixed immediately. So they have a hotel mentality, if you will, where you call the front desk and boom, somebody's up to clear the drain or do whatever needs to be taken care of. So that's the type of responsiveness that will be expected for furnished rentals as well. The next cost could be cleaning between stays. Again, much more intensive for short-term rentals than the medium or long-term rentals, but still, you got to have the people there to do it and to take care of things as quickly as possible. Another cost is replacing missing, damaged, or stolen furniture items. So let's say you have a guest that checkouts at 11, check-in is at 3, so you have 4 hours to turn that property, and the last guest walked out with a TV and half the dishes. Well, you have to be in a position where not only can you cover the expenses of that, but do it very quickly because the next guest doesn't care that the last guest walked away with that stuff. All they know is, hey, I rented this house to have a TV and all the furnishings that go along with that too. So that's the expectation. So you got to be in a position where you can actually cover that and do that well. Next is more wear and tear on the property as people come and go more frequently. And it's not their home like it would be for an unfurnished rental. So again, this is something they're just maybe here for vacation or short term. So they're not maybe so concerned about what's going to happen with that property is over the long term. And last but not least is your time and or the cost of management. So management is very intense for all furnished rentals, but even more so for short-term rentals, as we've already discussed here, because you might have to turn the property every couple of days. So if you manage the rental, you must have a lot of time to spend on it and be available 7 days a week for bookings and maintenance issues. Now, if you hire a management company, it will be very expensive, but rightfully so, because it's a lot of work. So be prepared for those management costs. Those are just a few costs to consider. Certainly, there are many more, but just to get you to start thinking. So again, remember, although the gross income will be higher, so will your costs. So let's get back to the question that we set out to answer in the first place, which is a furnished rental worth it? So let's break it down by each type and take a look one by one. So first of all, let's look at short-term furnished versus unfurnished. So in this scenario, in this business model, short-term furnished have the ability to be more profitable. But a couple things you got to make sure of. One, we talked about the HOA. You got to make sure that it is allowed. Again, here in Tucson, most HOAs will not allow them. So that's a non-starter right off the bat. You also have to have the capital invest up front. And then you must have great management, be it you or a management firm. If you don't have all three of these things, it will not be successful. Midterm furnished rentals versus unfurnished. So in this scenario, unfurnished wins this battle every time, hands down. It's not even close. From a purely financial perspective, these make no sense. Midterm furnished rentals, I would argue, make no sense. Because what will happen is for those 3 months, you might get more per month in rent, but because the property then is going to sit vacant for the other 9 months, it just doesn't come out. You'll actually make more money over the course of the year doing an unfurnished rental. And the other thing that happens is during that 9-month vacancy period, risk of maintenance issues that go unnoticed might pop up, squatters, vandalism, landscape upkeep, all kinds of other things can happen when a property is vacant. So definitely I would not recommend a midterm furnished rental really under any circumstances. Long-term furnished rental versus unfurnished. Here again, long-term furnished rentals could make sense, But there are a bunch of different things that have to line up for this to happen. One, you have to have the right house and the right location. So we talked about some of those different categories of different people that might be looking to rent this furnished rental. You got to make sure the house fits that. And then you have to have the connections to that right market. So if it's the military, having connections to that market and who might rent the house, or if it was traveling nurses, have the connections there. Whatever the case may be, you have to have those connections. We had talked about too on several of the other examples of having that upfront capital to spend for that new furniture. So again, do you have that money to spend? And same thing, you got to have great management in place again. And for this to work, you have to keep it booked throughout the year with very little vacancy, because again, if you don't, then it's not going to pan out as it relates to being financially beneficial to you. So if you don't have all those things, it's not going to be successful either. So I hope this video helped you determine if a furnished rental is worth it for you. If you found this video helpful, subscribe below for more landlord tips like this.